Now, for more reaction to Premier Smith's Sovereignty Act, we're now joined by two members of Parliament. Arif Virani is the Liberal member for the riding of Parkdale High Park in Toronto. He's also the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of International Trade. And Blake Desjarlais is the NDP member of Parliament for the riding of Edmonton-Griesbach. Hello to both of you.
Hi there.
Hey, Michael.
Mr. Virani, you know, the Prime Minister says he's not looking for a fight with Alberta. He's going to wait and see. Is that because he believes this will not survive a court challenge?
Well, I think it's a bit premature, in fairness, to talk about a court challenge. What we have is something that was introduced in the Alberta legislature today at first reading. It hasn't even passed the legislature, and even if it does pass the legislature, it still requires some action or motion to be moved by a cabinet minister to trigger something under this potential legislation. I think what's important is that the Prime Minister is emphasizing is that we deal with Albertans the way we deal with every other part of the country. We're trying to address people's needs. And in Alberta, we've had constructive discussions and dialogue and cooperation even on things like the childcare legislation that we put forward, that Jason Kenney cooperated with us on, things like hydrogen, green hydrogen, carbon capture. These types of things I think are important to Albertans and they're important to all Canadians, and that's what we're focused on right now.
Okay, that's your focus. Mr. Desjarlais, I'm wondering from your perspective, as an Albertan, what do you think of what's being proposed here?
Well, I think, Michael, what Albertans are used to in many ways is this kind of adversarial approach to Ottawa. You know, it's not far out to suggest that Albertans have in fact seen over the period of time some resistance to some of the issues that matter most to Albertans. But what we're seeing with Danielle Smith is something far different than that. We're seeing very drastic overreach and extreme pushback, and it's hurting Albertans today. That's really my belief, and it's what I hear on the doors. I know that this is not top of mind for Albertans. Albertans would have liked to see a plan from their premier that looked and addressed at the healthcare crisis we're facing in our province. People are lined up right now in the Calgary hospital. Some kids are waiting 20 hours just to see a physician. Kids who are sick at home have no access to the medicine they need, and what they're seeing from their premier isn't the kind of leadership that people would expect. People would expect a leader that actually addresses the needs of Albertans, and that's not what we're seeing right now. Now,
Mr. Virani, I know you say it's too early to talk about any type of court challenge, but you know, Premier Smith has been very open about this. She argues that this act only ensures the separation of powers and responsibilities between provinces and the federal government. It really is guaranteed by the Constitution, and she points to what she sees as federal overreach in programs like national childcare. What do you say to that?
Well, I'd say that obviously her government, or the predecessor leader of the government of Alberta, signed an agreement with us with respect to childcare. We do not feel that we have usurped our jurisdiction or exceeded our jurisdiction. But I also point out, I mean, Michael, I used to practice law in this specific area of the division of powers and the Charter of Rights, and we know that there are venues for challenging constitutionality of provisions. Those venues are the courts. It's important that it remains that way. So it's not for the Premier of Alberta or any federal government elected leader to opine on constitutionality. That's for courts to verify. We just think it's a little bit premature to be opining upon that. Obviously, you know, it's important that Blake just highlighted healthcare. Healthcare is a pressing matter. It's also a matter of shared jurisdiction. We have a Canada Health Act. We ensure that the principles of the Canada Health Act are adhered to, and that's an important facet of how our federation operates, and that's something that we'd like to be working with Albertans and other premiers on, and that's the type of thing that I think people are really more concerned about, rather than what seems to be a fairly symbolic gesture and just really just that.
But I'm wondering if you're concerned about the language that's being used here, because in justifying this act, the Premier has said that the Trudeau government has been disrespectful of Alberta and Albertans. She argues the government has crossed jurisdictional lines, have stood in the way of the province's oil industry, ignored the province's concerns over transfer payments. So I appreciate what you're saying, but certainly the language around this being used to justify it points to your government.
And I've heard the language, and obviously different premiers will employ different languages, and obviously she's speaking to Albertans and perhaps her base in terms of utilizing that type of language. But I'll say to you that, you know, there have been instances where grievances have been raised about potential constitutional overreach by the federal government. The most recent example is actually when the Alberta government joined with a few others around the country and challenged our price on pollution. That went to the Supreme Court of Canada. That's the most appropriate venue. It ruled unanimously in favor of the federal government, exercising rightful jurisdiction to address what is a pressing national issue, which is climate change and environmental pollution. So we have fora for these disputes. Those fora are the courts. That's where constitutional matters are meant to be determined, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it should be. In terms of Premier Smith, I mean, I'd encourage you to reach out to her directly about the type of language she's using. We want to have a productive dialogue with MPs, such as Blake from the province of Alberta, but also with the provincial government of Alberta itself, because that's to the benefit of those Albertan Canadians.
Blake, what do you say to the language that's being used here, or at least the arguments being used, in terms of pointing to Ottawa as ignoring the province, ignoring Albertans, and again, ignoring issues like federal transfer payments?
Well, I think it's a convenient and easy distraction for Albertans that have just seen one of the worst experiences as Albertans reeled with the results of COVID under leadership of former Premier Kenney. And so for her, she's going to have a really interesting pitch to Albertans to actually find a way to change the dial on Jason Kenney's deplorable actions in the province, and especially the underfunding of our public healthcare system. So I think in one way the language is a distraction for folks, but to be more explicit, we've seen from other Indigenous groups across the province, my relatives from Treaty 6 to Treaty 7 to Treaty 8, unanimously denounced the language found in the Act because of its overreach and its threat to treaty rights in the province. And so I think what we're seeing, one is the threat to treaty rights in that language, and then two, I think a really big concern within the language is the perspectives of democracy and the rule of law being upheld in our province. When we're talking about those two incredibly important principles, and we see the language of the ministers being able to go in, or the Premier into the province of Alberta, and go into the House and declare something unconstitutional, and then simply have it read as unconstitutional for the purpose of the minister to then direct other bodies and agencies like police to ignore federal laws. This is an egregious attack on the rule of law and democracy in Alberta, and I do believe that we need to find ways to ensure that treaty rights and the rights of Albertans aren't trampled on.
Okay, I've got less than a minute, and so forgive me, Mr. Virani, we're going to stay here with Mr. Desjarlais, because I wonder, as someone from Alberta, the province has an election in 6 months. Do you think Danielle Smith will gain any political points with this act?
No. I believe that what she's done for Albertans is further polarize Albertans in a time when we need unity. We need a province and we need a leader that truly recognizes Albertans and where they're at. We need to recognize that rural Alberta and urban Alberta are in fact part of the same province, and that we can in fact have a united province of Alberta. And her language and what she's doing is further dividing Albertans. You might have seen recently she failed to run in the empty seat in Calgary because it was an urban riding. She told Calgarians that they weren't worth representing, and so she called a by-election elsewhere in Medicine Hat, a rural seat where she could win. What does that say to urban ridings in the province of Alberta? What does that say to Calgarians when they're someone that they expect to be premier in the short few months back when she was running wasn't able or wasn't willing to run in an urban center like Calgary? It speaks to a party that can't unite.
Blake Desjarlais, Arif Virani, thank you very much for the time today. Appreciate your thoughts on the matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.